In 1993, I didn't think psychology was the way forward for me and my revolutionary love inclusive approaches, so I did something else instead. In order to help people, now we have to deal with talking therapy. And what are we going to talk about? Naturally, of course, this is going to be all about trauma, right? Chapter 3. Let's dive into the trauma. In 1998, I found EFT, Emotional Freedom Techniques, the simplified version of thought field therapy by Dr. Roger Callahan, a clinical psychologist who had taken the technique from a gentleman called Jim Diamond and used it exclusively to treat trauma, as any good psychologist would. I was delighted. Finally, a way to work with energy directly and officially. Tapping on meridian points, energy flows in the real energy body to remove blockages. Where did these blockages come from? Well, trauma, of course. Many existing psychologists, fed up with not having anything to actually help their clients with their trauma, took to the tapping therapies and started to call themselves energy psychologists. I thought that was a nice try, but seeing that psychology doesn't accept that there is such a thing as an energy body in the first place, I personally could not see energy psychology being embraced by the general psychologists or to be allowed into the hallowed halls of psychology science. I gave that little heed because I was busy finding out what people do and why they do the things they do. EFT tapping was fascinating. In the hands of an intuitive practitioner, you could turn a spider phobia into a love for spiders in under an hour. Cure a fear of flying, a fear of elevators, of clowns, of balloons, of injection needles, or of heights. Even all manner of allergic responses could be worked with, as well as psychosomatic problems and all the many negative emotions. The fact is that a person who gets frightened by a dog as a child will become very afraid of dogs. And when we tap on these meridian points and improve the flow of energy through the living energy body, that fear recedes and never comes back in its original form. I would like to point out that this is still the case. So if you ever meet anyone who has a specific phobia or fear of something specific, send them to someone who does modern energy tapping. It will solve that particular problem for them. The great fairy tale of childhood trauma. Soon enough, instead of focusing on a single problem, people would want to change their lives with EFT tapping. At the time, I didn't realize this, but the entire population is programmed to think there's something wrong with them, something that happened in childhood. And if only they could remember that and talk about it for long enough, or release it with EFT tapping, their lives would change immediately and they could live happily ever after. This is a strange kind of fairy tale, deep at the bottom of the trauma quest, and we will return to this later. For now, we have an endless stream of clients who want to tap on their traumas to radically change their lives for the better. Now, EFT brought something to the psychology party that had never been known before, the ability to release any trauma in a single session. That was completely unheard of in psychology, where one single trauma can be discussed for years, literally, and it never releases at all to the point where the client just laughs and says, "Ah, that was so in the past, I'm so over that." EFT tapping, however, did just that. A single practitioner could see 40 clients in a week and release their traumas. A single client could do 10 tapping sessions in a week and release 10 traumas. And yet, and curiously, nothing much changed in their lives at all. Wait a minute. What about the fairy tale? About that person whose life had sucked because when they were 3 years old, they fell off a swing. And by releasing this formative trauma, now their life doesn't suck anymore and they get to live happily ever after. This was not happening. And the longer the tapping experiment went on, the more this became apparent. There were also problems that did not get solved by tapping on trauma or by trying to find the specific trauma that might have caused the problem. The first crack in the Great Wall of Trauma. Here, I tell the story of my personal moment of enlightenment on that topic, which was the lady who ate buckets of strawberry ice cream when she felt lost and lonely. As I inquired into this, she told the story of sitting with her father on a bench by the seaside. He has bought her a strawberry ice cream. The wind is cold, she shivers. He puts his arm around her, and she feels warmed, loved and protected, happier than she had ever been before, just at that same moment as her tongue makes contact with the strawberry ice cream. That was the moment when I discovered another form of driver for an existing problem. It was a happy event, a guiding star, which caused the problem in the here and now. That was in 2000, and once again, my aspect was hugely excited by this discovery. The very idea of happy events being the absolute root cause of a behavioral problem here and now was, once again, complete heresy in the trauma cult. As always, I thought that my research had something beneficial to offer to those who want to help other people and in general have a better understanding of how and why people do the things they do. But once again, nobody took any notice and the trauma tapping went on exactly as before. Personally, I became fascinated by the fact that people do not just have trauma events, but clearly also guiding star events. And I began to wonder what other kinds of events happen in people's lives and how they influence behavior over entire lifetimes. That was really interesting, and I spent 8 years on finding out more about this. I learned a lot, wrote up my findings in the attempt to share the insights derived from this period of research and the techniques we can use to deal with a variety of events in a book called Event Psychology. This was published in 2008, and as the Harmony program before it was entirely ignored. If it isn't trauma, it doesn't even exist. I still did not realize how deep and wide the trauma cult really was. But that moment came in 2011 when I was teaching a correspondence course for professional energy tapping, which I called Energy EFT. There is a unit on tapping for trauma, and the next unit deals with treating guiding stars that are causing problems in the here and now, such as philias, fetishes, and addictions. In the unit on guiding stars, in which every exercise, every method, every technique, and every example was about guiding star events. As the homework exercise, it was set to treat an event of your own. I particularly phrased it as treat an event, so that I could pick up any student who would try to treat some trauma once more, just to be on the safe side. What happened was that the first few students, all of whom had immediately treated a trauma again, made me laugh. 20 or so students who all failed to treat a guiding star, and I was becoming scared. By the time all 197 students had all immediately fallen back into trauma, I had begun to realize just how bad this really was, how widespread the trauma entrainment was, how deeply rooted. I also realized that I was still doing the same thing. Whenever anything went wrong, I would reflexively start wondering what trauma in my childhood that was related to. And that wasn't just me either. I became aware of how the trauma culture infused everything, everywhere, and all the time. Songs about trauma, movies with heroes and villains whose motivation is trauma, social media feeds with trauma-based memes, trauma-based art, trauma-based poetry, trauma as the only possible explanation for literally everything. It is extraordinary once you start to see it. And that's before what was the general trauma cult swirling away in the background became the breeding ground for a radical ideology that weaponizes trauma swept the globe. The trauma cult is a cult. It is a matrix. It is incredibly destructive to those caught within it. However, once we understand that, there is an easy way out. We'll come to that in a little while. Before we do that, allow me to make my case against trauma in principle. "30 years ago, I was cancelled for finding out something during my research that was forbidden science. I have, however, continued to research, and I would like to offer you the opportunity to see what I've come up with in the last 30 years. It's not a very big book, as you can see, and it's got lots and lots of pictures in it. And you can download it for free right now at goe.ac/revolution. You can also support me and my work and this channel by buying a hard copy from Amazon. So, yeah, find out for yourself, make up your own mind. I believe in you and your intelligence.